Proverbs 6, lessons to be learned in life. We're continuing this study through Proverbs chapter 6. We've covered several things. There are 7 major lessons that we're looking at. The first one that we looked at, when we first began to look at the beginning of the chapter, were lessons from a bad loan. Sometimes you can commit yourself to making a bad loan or becoming responsible for someone financially that is not responsible financially. And we saw that in verses 1 through 5. King Solomon, trying to pass on some godly wisdom to his son. He said, "My son, if you become a surety for your friend, if you've shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you are snared by the words of your mouth. You are taken by the words of your mouth." Now this is repeated twice, by the words of your mouth. Snared by the words of your mouth and taken by the words of your mouth. This speaks to us about how important it is what we say and what we commit to. And when we make a commitment as Christians, when we commit to something, when we say, yes, I will do this, we ought to follow through with that commitment. We ought to keep our commitments. We ought to not be covenant breakers. We ought to not be commitment breakers. We ought to follow through. And we ought to be careful not to make commitments we can't keep. You know, no is a wonderful word to know how to say, to learn how to say. There comes a time when people will ask you for things, and this is what Solomon's talking about. Don't become surety for a friend, and really don't become surety for a stranger when it comes to some financial matters. You can get yourself in trouble, and you need to learn how to say no. Even if it's a buddy asking, or if it's a stranger and you feel bad for them, sometimes you just need to say no. It's the wise thing to do. And because, you know, we want to be liked. We want people to approve of us. And so sometimes we're just tempted to say, yes, I'll do this. But we need to learn to say no sometimes, because it's wise to say no sometimes. You should especially avoid any agreements that make you responsible for someone else's debt. And it says in verse 3, "So do this, my son, and deliver yourself, for you have come into the hand of your friend. Go and humble yourself. Plead with your friend. Give no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids." Get to it quick. Don't rest until you do it. "Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler." What happens to a gazelle when the hunter gets him? What happens to a bird when a hunter gets him, when he catches him in a trap? He's getting eaten for Thanksgiving dinner, right? And it's not going to be pleasant for him. And we don't need to get ourselves in a situation like that where we overcommit ourselves to something that we shouldn't be responsible. We need to be careful about the commitments we make. And it's not wise for us to have too much debt of our own. Even if you borrow for yourself, you get too much debt of your own, that's foolish. And we certainly don't need to be taking responsibility for the debts of other people on top of that. That's more foolishness. Secondly, we learned lessons from being lazy, right? Some folks, you know, are poor. Jesus made this statement. Jesus said, when one of the disciples were saying, "She should have sold that ointment. We could have took the money from that ointment that she poured all over Jesus' body." You know, he said that was a very expensive, and we could have sold that. We could have given that to the poor. And when Jesus was talking about to this Simon about this, remember what Jesus said? He said, "The poor you will have with you always." You cannot eradicate poverty from society. You're always going to have poverty in society. Always going to be poor people among us, because some people just won't get up off their blessed assurance and go to work. It's just not something that they want to do. And so they're going to remain poor. And so here's what we find Solomon doing for his son. He starts trying to teach him a good work ethic. A lazy life is going to lead to poverty. And so he says to his son, "Go to the ant, you sluggard." Now, you know what a slug is? A slug, you know, snails are famous for moving very slowly, right? Snails are famous for moving very slowly. A slug is just a snail that's so lazy he's homeless. He doesn't even have a shell to live in, right? That's what a slug is. My mom stepped on one time, and I heard her say words that I never thought my mother would say because it squished up between her toes. But a slug is slow and lazy. And you know the difference between a slug and an ant? Ants are always busy, furiously working, trying to get things done, but slugs just slug along. And they just inch along, leaving a big slimy mess everywhere they go. That's all they do. And Solomon wants to teach his lazy son. He speaks to his son very frankly. Go to the ant, you sluggard. You're like a slug. And he says, he wants to teach his son the reward, not only the reward of hard work. You ought to get up and work hard. It'll be rewarding for you. But he also wants to teach him that the consequence of the sinfulness of a lazy life. Because a lazy life leads to poverty. So he says, go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no captain, no overseer or ruler, provides her supplies in the summer, gathers her food in the harvest, does whatever she needs to do when it needs to be done. She does everything. Doesn't have to have anybody to tell her to do it. And it says, how long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands and sleep. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler, and your need like an armed man. It's going to be like a thief breaking in your house. One day you're going to wake up, and you're going to be poor because you won't go to work. You keep hitting that snooze button, and you're going to be late for work, and you're going to find yourself unemployed, and it's going to lead to poverty. You're not going to have a bed to sleep in or an alarm clock to go off for you. You're not going to have a home to sleep in because you're going to lose it all because laziness leads to poverty. The third lesson that we've been learning from Solomon are lessons from a brazen liar. Wicked, worthless people. Like we said, a naughty person, right? We saw that. And the root word is not, which means nothing, worthless, worth nothing. It says in verse 12, a worthless person, a wicked man walks with a perverse mouth. He's always trying to get around the truth. He doesn't want to face the truth, and so he's trying to, the first part of perverse is parry, so he's trying to circle on around the truth because he doesn't want to face the truth. Solomon's warning us that there are some wicked, worthless people out there, and it's just better if we avoid them because they lie, and they scheme, and they plot, and they bluff, and they try to take advantage of people, and even their body language tells on them. It shows that they're dishonest. You can see it in their body language because he winks with his eyes, it says in verse 13. He shuffles his feet. He points with his fingers. Perversities in his heart. He devises evil continually. He sows discord. Therefore, he's going to be judged. His calamity shall come suddenly. He shall be broken without remedy. God's not going to let men who take advantage of people like that, who scheme and plot and lie and take advantage of people, God's not going to let them continue to do that forever. They may get away with it for a little while. They're not getting away with anything because God's going to judge them. They may do it for a little while, but eventually God's going to pour out His judgment on them. It's going to be bad. Their calamity is coming upon them. The fourth lessons we learn are lessons from battling the Lord. And we see that in this list of sins here that Solomon tells us the Lord hates. In verse number 16, it says, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination. You have the 6 things first and the 7 because, just when you think you've counted all the terrible, sinful things going on in the world, there's more, right? There's 6 and then there's 7. There's more. These 6 things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination to Him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood. Do we have that in America? Hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among the brethren. These are 7 things that are an abomination. Abomination is a sin that is disgusting to the Lord. It is disgusting to the Lord. It is sickening. Not that you can make the Lord, sick Himself, but, He says in Revelation, He looks upon the lukewarm life and He's ready to spew you, vomit you out of His mouth if you're living a lukewarm life. These are things that disgust the heart of God. And I think this list of sins vividly describes the culture we're living in here in our country right now. Pride, lying, murder, wicked plans, feet swift in running to evil, false witnesses who speak lies, one who sows discord among the brethren. All those things came together. Everything that we see there in the people who put Jesus on trial and put him on the cross, they were proud. They were proud of themselves for what they were doing. They lied. They shed his innocent blood. Their heart devised wicked plans. They schemed how they could do this. Their feet were swift in running to evil. They got him up before the sun came up, and they rammed him through the courts so quick. And they brought false witnesses to speak lies against him. And they sowed discord, and they divided against each other. And it's everything that we see here they did on the night that they put Christ on trial to put him on the cross. Everything. But we see these things. These are the kinds of things that we see in our culture so much, and they're abominable to the Lord. And so we're going to move on. This is where we got to last time. And now we're going to learn tonight. We're going to come to the fifth part of our lessons. That is lessons from blessed leaders. Lessons from blessed leaders. And here's a section that's just a little different, because all these things we're talking about that we've seen so far in chapter 6, Solomon's been speaking about sins that people commit. I think sins that he has committed. And then when he's had to end up facing the consequences of those sins, he's learned valuable lessons from it. When he had to face the consequences, he had to feel the hurt of those sins and learn from that. But this time, Solomon's circling back here to something that he's already touched on in every chapter we've been through so far. Most of the chapters we've been through, that's how he begins the chapter. But this one, he speaks of all these wicked things, and then he comes back to what he's been saying at the beginning of all these other chapters. He comes back to this. And so here's his point here. The point is, you don't have to make those mistakes. You don't have to go through all those painful consequences if you'll just listen to the wisdom of the people who love you and are trying to warn you not to go down that path. Amen? You don't have to make those mistakes and pay those consequences and commit those devastating sins. Well, here's what we hear in verse 20. Proverbs 6:20. He says, "My son, keep your father's command, and do not forsake the law of your mother." Right? Have we heard that in every chapter so far? Just about at the beginning of every Proverbs so far. We've been told that in very similar words in Proverbs 1, Proverbs 2, Proverbs 3, Proverbs 4, Proverbs 5, and now here in Proverbs 6, we're seeing it again. Just listen to the things your mother and father are trying to tell you, because they are people who love you, and they're going to try to lead you in a wise and good direction. He goes on in verse 21, he says, bind them. He's talking about the things they teach you. We've heard this statement already. Bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. These things your mother and I are telling you, these things that wise, godly people are trying to pass down to you, you need to attach themselves unto yourself so you can take them with you wherever you go. Tie them around your neck. Bind them upon your heart. Don't just bind them upon your heart, but bind them continually. How do you bind these principles upon your heart? You read it again and again, and you memorize it. What did David say? Thy word have I hidden in my heart, that I might not sin against thee, right? We need to bind them continually, so we have to go back to it again and again, these things that we're being taught. You need these wise things in your heart. You need them. You need to attach them to yourself. Why? Why do you need them? Well, verse 22 says, when you roam, they will lead you. Right? I love my little grandbaby, but sometimes my oldest grandbaby, she likes to just run off in a direction she's not supposed to go. And so I make her hold on to that finger right there, right? And whenever she starts to kind of go off in that direction, you know, and I stop. She feels me stopping, and so she comes back in the direction that I want her to go. I'm going to lead her, and I want to keep her safe. I don't want her running off, getting hurt. These kind, godly, wise truths will lead you in a wise, good direction. It says when you sleep, they will keep you. The word keep means guard you, protect you, keep you from harm. Now, when you're asleep, you're vulnerable, right? Because somebody can walk right up to you and they can shoot you. They can break in your house. They can stab you. They can hurt you. They can kill you. They can put shaving cream on your face. They do that at camp all the time. But if you take this wisdom to your heart, you take this wisdom into your life, if you bind this wisdom upon your heart continually, Solomon tells us this wisdom will keep you. This wisdom will protect you when you sleep. It'll keep you when you sleep. And somebody say, well, how in the world can wisdom protect you when you sleep? Well, for one thing, wisdom will protect you from making foolish choices that would contribute to you lying down and going to sleep in a very dangerous place, right? Sometimes people do foolish things, causes them to lie, right? Wisdom will guard you from the foolish behavior of drunkenness, right? And drunkenness definitely has led a lot of people into a very dangerous, to lie down. You know, drunk people don't even care where they walk, right? They might walk right out in front of traffic, right? They might try to fight a guy who can obviously destroy them, right? When you're drunk, you don't have any idea. You think you're 10 foot tall and indestructible and you'll fight anybody in the world, right? I don't know. I just have heard about you guys when y'all are drunk because I've never been that way. But, you know, you just don't care. You do foolish things. And but wisdom will keep you from doing that. Wisdom will keep you from drunkenness in the first place. And a drunk person who doesn't care where he's going or what he's doing, he may lay down in a very dangerous place and lose his life because of it. But wisdom can preserve you from that. And wisdom can keep you from lying down with an adulterous woman. That's another thing we're circling back to here. That's a very foolish thing, because if you lay down with an adulterous woman, and when I say an adulterous woman, I mean you lay down with another man's wife, you might not wake up from that either, right? Amen? Yeah. If her husband comes in, finds you there, but wisdom can protect you from that. And it also goes on to say in verse 22, and when you awake, they will speak with you. These wise principles will speak with you when you wake. When you let these godly, wise principles lead you and keep you safely through the night, you're going to wake up blessed. You're going to wake up with joy in your heart. You'll be glad you listened to the voice of the God who loves you, of your parents who love you, of the people who love you and are trying to lead you in the right way. You know, the Word of God always has something to say to us if we'll just be willing to listen, right? It always does. And it's especially good if we begin to listen to His Word when we first wake up in the morning. When you awake, they will speak with you. God's Word will speak with you early in the morning. That's a great way to start the day with God's Word. Great way to start the day. Wisdom can preserve you, keep you, protect you, deliver you from all kinds of trouble. It can even fill you with joy if you'll just listen. Because it goes on to say here in verse 23, for the commandment is a lamp, and the law is a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life. What do you need when you're in the dark? You need a light. You need a light to get you through. And when your parents and the people who love you try to impart their wisdom unto you, they're passing light to you to help you shine it on your path to keep you safe in a very dark and dangerous world. And what does the Bible say? Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. That wisdom is in this book. It'll give you light to guide you down the right path in a very dangerous world. Sixthly, tonight, the sixth group of lessons we're going to learn are lessons from being lustful. Lessons from being lustful. Verse 24. These wise principles are to, verse 24, to keep you from the evil woman, from the flattering tongue of the seductress. And again, I say Solomon circling back to this, once again, because this was a sin Solomon is very guilty of. Many wives, many concubines. And I don't know if he had any porcupines, but he had a lot of concubines. And he's coming back because this caused him a lot of pain, caused him a lot of heartache, and he doesn't want to see his son go down that road. It brought him a lot of sorrow in his own life. And so again and again here, as we continue to go through Proverbs, this is something that he's going to bring. This is a father speaking to his son, and he's talking to him very directly, warning him about the pain that adultery will bring into your life. He says, an evil, adulterous woman is a seductress because she knows exactly what you want to hear. She knows exactly how to say it to you to make you feel good. She may sound very sweet. She may even speak to you in a nicer way than your wife has spoken to you in a long time, and that make you feel 10 years younger and real good about yourself. She may even be doing that in a season when your wife has had some very mean, harsh, nasty things to say to you. But I promise you, this evil, adulterous, seductress woman does not talk like that all the time. Okay? She's just in the moment trying to make a sale to you. She's trying to close a transaction with you. It's not until you get back there and spend a little time with her that the animal comes out of the cage, okay? And it's a monster. As we read back in Proverbs 5, it says, her lips drip honey. Her mouth is smoother than oil, but in the end she's bitter as wormwood, which is poison, bitter poison. She's a wicked deceiver, and if she would cheat on her husband, she will cheat on you. If she would cheat on her husband with you, then she'll cheat on you to be with someone else. If she would cheat with you, even if she's unmarried and you are married, and she would cheat with you, she'll cheat on you. Solomon warns us here in verse 25, do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. Isn't that amazing? People put makeup on their eyes, and then they put the thing on their lashes, but they put all the makeup on their eyelids, and then they bat those eyes, trying to get to somebody. Isn't it something? I mean, I'm not against makeup. I think any old barn looks better when it's painted a little bit, but this do not lust after her beauty, it says, in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. She's not who you think she is. She's not who she appears to be. And this is not going to end up. This is what Solomon's trying to make him understand. This is not going to end up the way you think it's going to end. She may look beautiful on the outside, but once you get past the beautiful wrapping, you're going to find the filth and the wickedness and the anger and the meanness on the inside. And so that's another warning about that. And we're going to see those again and again and again as we go through Proverbs. Not wise to have a relationship with that wicked woman. So the seventh lesson now, we're going to have lessons from a broken life. This is going to come to us in several parts now. These are lessons from a broken life. And here's Solomon, who has been engaged in this kind of adulterous living in his life. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, he did not deny himself any pleasure. He poured his heart into every way he could find to try to make himself feel happy. And at the end of it, he felt empty, unsatisfied. He felt empty and unsatisfied, miserable. And so, as we look at these next few things here, these go down through these last verses down toward the end of the chapter, what we're going to be seeing are the consequences of living in adultery and how it can just shatter your life. Adultery is a life-shattering sin, and it has led to so much hurt in the lives of so many people. And so we're going to take this on down to the end of the proverb. The first reason we need to stay away from it is because it is a sin that makes men destitute. Adultery is a sin that makes destitute. If you look at verse 26, and it says, "For by means of a harlot, a man is reduced to a crust of bread." Whereas before he had a family, he had a home, he had a job, he had an income, he paid his bills, he maybe had some staff that worked with him, all kinds of, he was doing pretty good. But now he's been reduced to maybe a crust of bread. Not really a piece of bread, but maybe the crust that John cut off because he doesn't like the crust and he gave it to him, or dropped it in the floor and the guy picked it up off the floor. He's reduced to a crust of bread that's left over. I've said this before and I'll repeat it tonight. Sin will always take you farther than you want to go. Sin will always cost you more than you want to pay. And sin will always keep you longer than you want to stay. That's just a fact. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, "I want to ruin my life with sin today." Nobody does that. Nobody says, I want to throw my life away and end up in the gutter through sin today. It always starts when somebody says, "I'm just going to try this once and I'll never do it again." That's how sin gets in. That's how it gets its foot in the door. And that's how it gets you hooked. I'm just going to try this once. That's where sin gets in, gets you hooked. It puts you in bondage, makes you a slave. It starts with just trying something one time, and it gets you hooked and gets you coming back again and again and again. The problem is, guys, when sin gets rooted that deeply in your life, you get so hooked, you'll start giving up on other things. When sin, listen to me, when sin gets that rooted that deeply in your life, you'll start giving up on other things that are more important, sacrificing other things that are more important so that you can keep that sin in your life. You understand what I'm saying? When sin gets that hold in your life, you want to keep it. And so you start indulging in it more and more, and you start hurting the relationships around you. You'll give up relationships with your wife, with your children, with your friends, with your church, with your God. Everything important and precious in your life, you let go of to satisfy that urge. And the really sad thing is, as many hundreds and hundreds of times as you do it, it never satisfies that urge. It will never fill what you're trying to fill. Never. You'll never get satisfied in it. And like Solomon warns here, some men have spent all their living and been reduced to a crust of bread to keep having the experience of a harlot again and again. You remember the story of the prodigal son? He's just a young kid, right? Luke chapter 15 and verse 30 tells us that he wasted all his father's inheritance on riotous living and harlots. Partying and harlots. He wasted. He had an inheritance coming from his father. It was big money. And he burned through it all with harlots. And you know where he ended up? He ended up in a pig pen. He went out there with a bunch of money, but it didn't take him long before his desire for harlots left him reduced to just hoping he could eat a little bit of leftover scraps off the bottom of a pig trough. Something that the pigs left behind, a little chunk that the pigs didn't eat up, hoping he could eat that. He was reduced to a little piece of pig slop for harlots. That's a sad story, isn't it? But adultery is a sin that makes destitute. Secondly, adultery is a sin that is deadly. It is a sin that is deadly. Verse 26 goes on. It says, "An adulteress will prey upon his precious life." An adulteress will prey on his precious life. You remember the story of Samson? What was it that got him off track? Delilah, right? He thought she was a beautiful woman. His parents said, "Stay away from her. She's trouble." Solomon didn't listen to them. He didn't listen. Samson didn't listen to them. He was drawn in by the physical beauty of Delilah, and he was influenced by her enticing words, and she kept talking to him. Even though he took a bunch of Philistines out with him, though, when he died, it killed him. It killed him. It cost him his life. She kept every time she would talk to him, she'd get him to go just a little bit farther. And just a little bit farther. And you know what she would do? She would cry, "Oh, you don't love me, Samson. You don't love me." And he'd just be like, "Oh, I do love you." Well, here, I'll tell you my secret. Here, I'll tell you. And it cost him his life. And he died. It killed him. It killed him. Did you know under Israel's law, the law of Moses, the penalty for adultery, death by stoning? Leviticus 20, verse 10, the man who commits adultery with another man's wife, he who commits adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. Man, I bet there's some of you right now living here in America are glad that's not the law in America, right? Because you know that you wouldn't be alive right now, right? Yeah. You guys quit pointing at each other. So if a person in a system where that was the law, you commit adultery, you're going to be stoned to death. In a system where that's the law. If a person really cares for you, why would that person ever risk involving you in something that could get you stoned to death? That doesn't sound like love, does it? I mean, it sounds like they don't care about your life. Third reason that adultery is so disastrous is because it's a sin that brings disgrace. It's a sin that brings disgrace. Look at verse 27. Can a man take fire into his bosom and his clothes not be burned? Can you reach into a big hot fire, pull out a log that's on fire, orange glowing hot, set it in your lap without burning your clothes? Just leave it there. Can you do that without burning your clothes? Of course not, right? You can't do that. You're going to burn your clothes. And he goes on, he says, can a man walk on hot coals and his feet not be seared? Of course not. If you do something stupid with fire, you're going to get burned. And that's the point. If you do something stupid with adultery, you're going to get burned. You're going to get hurt by it. So he says in verse 29, he says, so is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. We get burned in our souls. Innocence is lost. Don't you even begin to think you can do something like this, and you're going to be the first person in the world to walk away scot-free without having any guilt because of it, because you're not going to be that person. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. You're not going to be the only person in the world to escape God's sight and God's judgment. You're not going to walk away innocent without it bringing a heavy load of guilt in your life. You're not going to be able to walk away clean. It's going to pollute your life with guilt. And listen to what Solomon explains here in verse 30. He says, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's starving. Right? People don't despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's starving. We kind of have a little bit of compassion towards something like that, right? A little bit of compassion. Yet, when he's found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. You know, there's a penalty if somebody steals. They may have to endure some punishment. They may lose everything they have if they're a thief. There's a penalty for that. We understand this, though. He's not saying it's okay to steal. He's not making excuses for a person who steals. Even though they're hungry, it doesn't make it right. But he's saying if a person steals because he's hungry, people can understand why he did it. There's a little bit of compassion and understanding why he did that. But if a person commits adultery with another man's wife, why did he do that? I mean, he's not trying to keep himself or his family from dying of hunger. He's just trying to satisfy an urge. He's just trying to satisfy an urge. And even though he may have to pay this thief, even though this thief may have to pay some serious consequences, it may cost him for a long time. He may lose his home, never be able to buy another home. Yet people can still understand why he would steal if he stole, and he needed to eat. But listen to what he goes on to say. He says in verse 32, he says, "Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor he will get, and his reproach," and that means shame, "his reproach will not be wiped away." Okay, understand, stealing is wrong, and there's a penalty for it. But if you steal out of necessity because you don't want to starve, people aren't going to hold that against you for the rest of your life. And I'm talking people. People aren't going to hold that against you for the rest of your life. But if you commit the sin of adultery, if you sleep with another man's wife, the shame of that is going to follow you the rest of your life. People will never forget that. When I say the name King David, what's the first thing you think about? Pretty much, nobody forgets that stuff. Now, you can go to the Lord. Listen, don't miss this. You can go to the Lord, and you can ask forgiveness, and He will forgive you. Okay? I don't want you to get me wrong on this. He will forgive you. He will wipe that guilt away. He will wipe that sin away if you repent. But people are always going to remember that you slept with another man's wife, and you cause all kinds of hurt, not just for your own family, but to another family. Maybe you even destroyed that family or your own family. And you didn't do it because you had a need, but it was all because you had a desire to satisfy an urge. And that's a shame that will chase you. That is a reproach that will chase you. It will never stop chasing you all your life long. I can still remember my mother, she would turn on this TV and watch preacher that fell in the 80s, got caught with a prostitute, got caught with a harlot twice. And she would turn on the TV and had one of the biggest churches in America, and she would watch, and she would just wanted to watch, and they had less people in their church than we have now. Probably less people than are in this room tonight. It was one of the biggest churches in America. And she would watch him beg on TV for money because he would say, it's critical, we're running so low on, and he would beg. And she would say, let's see if he's going to be frank today or if he's going to be earnest today. We don't know if he's going to be frank or earnest. Didn't know what his name was going to be. Let me be frank with you. The situation's critical. Let me be earnest with you. The situation's critical. But nobody still today, and even as I'm talking about this, some of you guys, the name that I'm talking about. Nobody will ever forget that. People won't forget that. It's a shame that follows you the rest of your life, and I don't have to remind you of his name because it's a shame that never goes away. Finally, you need to avoid adultery because it's a sin that brings destruction. And verse 34 says, "For jealousy is a husband's fury." Can you imagine how angry a man would be if he finds out you've been committing adultery with his wife? What do you think he'll do when he confronts you about it? I'll tell you one thing he won't do. He won't take it easy on you, right? Under the law, under Moses' law, they could take them before the elders and they could have them stoned. And do you think whenever he went to the elders, that husband, that hurting husband, went to the elders, do you think he would say, he would take it easy on him? Or would he say, go ahead and stone him? Now it says in verse 34, it says, "Therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance." He's not going to take it easy on you. You might be better to go out in the woods and slap a grizzly bear than to sleep with another man's wife, because at least the grizzly bear will kill you fast. But an angry husband won't take it easy on you. Now, if somebody stole some bread from him, that husband, somebody broke in his house, stole some food out of his pantry, just so he could eat, that guy might understand, you know. He might not be too hard on the guy. He might understand. He might take it easy on him. But he's not going to take it easy on a man who's committed adultery with his wife. Verse 35 says, he will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased through, though you give many gifts. You're not going to buy your way out of this. This is not something you can buy your way out of. It is a sin that will destroy you through the husband's fury. So it's very destructive. So let me just end with this tonight. Solomon is warning his son. He's warning us to stay away from the evil of adultery. Now, all this stuff we say about the evil, adulterous woman, the same stuff applies to the evil, adulterous man. Okay, we can take this either way. Except men just don't look as appealing, I don't think, to women. I don't see how they can, but men are funny looking. But he's telling us to stay away from the sin, the evil of adultery, because it will rob you. It'll rob you of your life. It'll rob you of your innocence. It'll rob you of your living. It'll leave you empty. Guys, the adulterous woman is not worth it. It is not worth it. This is what Solomon's trying to pass on to his son. This is not worth it. But then you go to the New Testament, and Paul tells us, as husbands, in Ephesians chapter 5, that we ought to love our own wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. We ought to love our wives enough to lay down our lives and die for them. Right? Because she's worth it, right? The adulterous woman is not worth losing all this for, but your wife, your bride, your precious bride, is worth losing your everything for, your life for. Okay? Now, take that bride of yours and think about this in reference to what we are. We are his church. We are his bride. And in his great love, he looked upon us and he said, they're worth dying for. They're worth me losing my life for. And I got to be honest, some days we don't live like great wives, great brides. Right? Some days we consider our own Christian walk, our own conduct, our own behavior. We act a little more like harlots. But he loved us anyway, right? And he laid down his life for us. So I'm thankful for him.